All right. Well, thank you, our distinguished panel up here, for joining us today. I'm going to turn it over to Josh Corman, the moderator. The panel is called Weaponization and Exploits. Here you go, Josh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here.
This is becoming a tradition. I like CodenomiCON. It eases me into the week. Just so we don't run overtime, how long would you like us to take?
You have 45 minutes.
Wow. Wow.
We can talk.
So what's everyone else going to talk about? Because I got 45 minutes to talk.
All right, so
we're going to drink, and so you talk, we'll drink.
That's fine. So weaponized exploit is...
All right, so before we get into the weaponization of exploits, let's do some introductions. We'll start with Charlie Miller on the end there.
As Dr. Miller?
Who?
Dr. Miller.
Dr. Charlie Miller.
Yeah, I didn't go to 5 years of school for nothing. So I'm Charlie Miller. I've done stuff like hack the iPhone, hack the Android phone, hack batteries, hack cars, other kind of cool stuff. I used to work at the NSA, so I do know something about weaponized exploits. And that's me. How you doing?
All right, Dave.
Wow, I feel remarkably and unaccustomedly sober.
I can fix that, Dave.
Yeah, we'll fix that later. My name is Dave Weinstein. These days I'm a security researcher over at HP's ZDI, which you can see on the very, very large screen above my head, hopefully.
You're at HP, dude?
I am at HP.
I didn't know that. Nice.
How do you spell HP?
It's spelled...
Charlie, I told you that like several times over the last year, but you were very drunk, so.
I know, but I do know you're not at Microsoft.
Yes.
Okay. So Dave worked at Microsoft for about a million years?
Nah, only 8.
8 years.
7
and
and a
now he's
half.
somewhere else, so cool. Congratulations.
Thank you. And I didn't go to 5 years of school, so you don't get to call me doctor. But I also didn't have the student loans for it. So.
They
All right.
paid me to go.
All right, Jared.
I'm Jared DeMott. I am now at a company named Bromium recently. Been in the scene for a while, yeah. And security researcher. Know a little something about weaponization as well. So
Since Charlie has decided we're going to be doing stand-up tonight, does this officially make you a programmer?
Whoa. Mic down.
wow.
It would take a far better man than I am to pass up an easy shot like that.
No.
All right, Rick.
Rick Mellendick, work for Chickasaw Nation Industries. CNI is easier to say. Pen tester by trade. Been doing the wireless stuff for a while. We started back at DEF CON 10 doing the wireless war drive. So come see us later.
Okay, I'm Josh Corman. I'm a Director of Security Intelligence for Akamai Technologies. But I think my relationship with CodenomiCON started because I started and founded Rugged Software to try to drive more conscientious attitudes towards building digital infrastructure. So there's some affinity there. But we're not going to talk about that. Today we're going to talk about the weaponization of exploits. Just to break down how we intend to do this, I'm not sure it'll go this way. But we all bristled quite a bit at the idea of weaponization. Words matter. And we wrestled with this term because it frames things in terms of conflict. It frames things in terms of politics, philosophy, ethics, morality. And of course, we're going to have to get into that. But what we think we're going to do is we're going to start first by clarifying terminology because too often we have homonyms or we use the same words for different meanings. So we're going to, at least within the context and scope of this conversation, try to define some things so we are consistently talking the same sheet of music. Then we're going to shift to really a fork, which is what is weaponization in terms of the political interpretations and what is weaponization in terms of the optics or how words matter in the mainstream, in the military, in the ethics of it. And then also to get into some practical things about what has it really done, the fact that people are paying for exploits or weaponized exploits in white markets, gray markets, and dark markets, how has that altered the whole economics of this space in good and bad ways? If people have burning questions, I will watch my Twitter feed as we go. So if you're too shy to ask in public, just send me a message at Josh Corman. And otherwise...
It's a blatant reason to try to add followers. It's ridiculous.
I don't know why anyone follows me, but... all right, but to lighten the mood even further, Charlie, what is your favorite 80s movie and why?
My favorite 80s movie. So I was only asked this about 30 seconds ago. I haven't had time to think. I like a lot of 80s movies. I would have to say Top Gun is like one of the most awesome movies. Someone booed Top Gun? That's ridiculous. So I watched Top Gun. I watched Top Gun in the 80s, of course. I also watched it about 3 weeks ago. It pretty much holds up, except the volleyball scene, maybe not. But like the rest of it, like Kelly McGillis is still cute. Like not now, but like then, and pretty much it's just still a pretty good movie, you know.
All right, Dave.
That would be My Favorite Year with Peter O'Toole and Mark Lynn Baker. And in addition to
You're a
being
very sophisticated man.
in addition to being, it's a comedy about Sid Caesar's show of shows, very, very loosely renamed as King Kaiser's Comedy Cavalcade. So it's not exactly highbrow humor. It's very, very funny, and my father swears the scene in Brooklyn really isn't all that much of an exaggeration.
Sure.
Can I go to the backup question?
That's a backup question?
He's phoning a friend.
He told us there was a backup question in case we got stumped.
You were going to choose Dave?
How did you get stumped on what your favorite 80s movie was?
Hey, I like the backup question better.
All right, you have a right to be a wuss. Yes.
Okay, all right.
The backup question is tell us something about yourself that we otherwise wouldn't have known.
And I just wanted to, pimp it as much as Charlie did. I also worked at NSA and have a PhD, but I didn't want to pimp it out there like that.
Wait a second.
Whoa.
So his PhD's not a real one because he didn't have it before the NSA. He got it after.
Okay.
I've been called doctor way more before him.
See, that's why I wanted to do the backup
Thank you.
question. Now you know why I wanted it.
Okay.
And
just
his
gonna
also
say-
isn't in math, which is a real subject.
So please, college dropouts represent. Come on.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Yes,
That's the cool thing about computer security is you don't gotta go to school to be a good.
it's true.
But it does help in learning your drinking skills, which are very, very important.
All right. After you hack the question, do you actually have a favorite 80s movie?
Maybe Star Wars? I don't know.
It came out
77?
It came out in
So I'm gonna call fail on
1977.
that.
That's like an off by
1977.
3 years error.
I wanted to say,
Hope
Billy
is
Madison,
wrong.
but it's not an 80s movie.
Okay. All right, so don't listen to anything he says the rest of the night.
He has
Okay.
no respect whatsoever.
All right, Rick.
Easy Empire. And we could start debates tomorrow if you'd like. Empire versus Star Wars, New Hope. But Empire, I think, was the better movie.
Star Wars. New Hope is a later edition. It's Star Wars.
New Hope was the name of the book.
All right.
That's the other reason I wanted to throw that out there. I wanted to get Dave going.
2013 is on.
See, this is what happens when you give us 45 minutes. We can screw around for a
We
while.
can antagonize each other.
All right. ICE is
Talk
properly.
about weaponized exploits, shall we?
Yes,
let's
let's
do that.
do it.
So, Charlie, what is a weaponized exploit?
Thank you for asking. So for me, so there's different. So there's a vulnerability, which means there's a problem, right? Maybe memory corruption, maybe something else. And there's an exploit, which takes advantage of that problem, and maybe that means it like you can change a register, maybe you can change the IP, whatever. And then there is a weaponized exploit. And so the difference is that a weaponized exploit has to work every time, under every condition, under every OS, under
What?
every version of the target software.
Every OS or every target?
Well, whatever. So it's got to work like
Has
all
to,
the time. It's
has
gotta
to
be-
work on a Mac.
It's got to work so that like some corporal in the army can press a button and it works. That's the definition, right? Like,
All right, so I'm gonna.
I have lots of exploits that work, but like if I give it to some dude who runs it, it doesn't work, right? Because he doesn't know what he's doing.
For
excuse me.
the pure developers in the audience, that means that even security people resort to, well, it worked on my machine.
Right. So it's got to work for everybody all the time. That's a weaponized exploit.
All right, so I'm gonna. I wish I had a way to capture this on the screen, but so two attributes inferred by your answer there are reliable
Reliable, yes.
and
And stable.
well,
Stable,
sure.
yes. Yeah. So I mean,
Customizable.
Like, you hear a lot about exploits. So you get EIP, and then you gotta like do something with it, right? So you can't just point it to like nothing. So you have to point to code, and that code might be in some randomized location. It might be in some spot that's not executable, and so there's a lot of work you have to go through. And you can, you can jam the heap full of code and hope for the best, right? And maybe that exploit works 80% of the time. That's not weaponized, right? A weaponized exploit has to work like, again, some 19-year-old dude who just like, he was in trouble in some small town in Dallas. He shows up in the army and the guy's like, press return. And that's got to work. right? And so he can't know anything about computers.
And there has to be an SOP that says the return button is the far right button starting with a capital R.
Exactly. So this is a weaponized exploit. None of us, 5 people, we can't tell the difference because, like, if something breaks, we fix it. So they can't fix it. It's just you press return, it works. That's a weaponized exploit.
All right, so it's interesting that most of your definition revolves around the quality of the exploit.
What else is there?
Is there anything about the
sanitization of comments?
So I was going to go with the payload. The moment we start talking about, we're actually talking about a weaponization, there needs to actually be a weapon there. I wish I could remember who, because it was a great comment. It came down the Twitter stream ages ago, so I can't remember. But someone said, stop calling your exploit weaponized until you tell me, or stop calling your tool weaponized until you tell me how many centrifuges it's blown up. Calc is not a weapon unless you're putting it in front of someone who is deeply traumatized by elementary school math. The payload matters. If you're going to call it a weapon, it actually has to have an outright hostile payload, which is going to do something to the distinct disadvantage of whoever you're aiming it at.
And with a weapon, there actually needs to be a motive. So there needs to be a country or entity that needs to deploy this weapon to enact a certain outcome that is positive to the people that are deploying it.
What I would say is actually for it to be a weapon, it has to have a negative outcome to the person it was used against. A bullet doesn't care if it makes you happy.
All right, we already have a comment from the audience.
So does kinetic impact, is it a necessity for...
Since you're not on, anyone who speaks is not on mic, so I will repeat it. So the question is, does this require kinetic impact?
So I think the fact that we're calling these weaponized and the way that the current group that we have running this country, and we're talking from our perspective, U.S. perspective, weaponization has to go into the kinetic mindset, but not the kinetic outcome. So it doesn't necessarily have to go boom, but it has to make what it is attacking go down.
I have to disagree with all you guys. So
Yeah,
you guys are
I was
all
gonna
really
disagree
smart,
too.
but I think you don't know anything about weaponized exploits. Dave. So anyway, I would say that it doesn't matter what the payload is. If you have an exploit that works every time under every condition and that you can plug in any payload you want, that's weaponized.
I'll disagree with both. So it's fine for something to not work all the time, especially for malware authors and stuff. They might call it weaponized. So 2 things I disagree with. The definition, first of all, to some people, weapon means like you go to hurt somebody. Other people just means like some kind of a cyber op where you're stealing people's credit cards or you're doing, it's not necessarily doing any kinetic damage, but it's still it's kind of like the word cyber. It means different things to different people. And secondly, they may be happy if it works 20% of the time if they're launching against 1 million people.
That's fine. That's an exploit, but it's not weaponized, right? Weaponized means it works, right?
I agree
also
with
means it's a weapon.
works, but I think a weapon could also be an excess. And again, we've been hearing in the news way too much. I'm not even going to say the words because he's wearing it on his shirt. But there's an access capability for a weapon as well. And I think that that's kind of the machine gun versus the rifle versus the sniper versus the pistol. Sometimes it's used for different reasons, but it's always a bullet.
Don't take Crispin's question.
The people at Colt and Smith and Wesson would agree with your emphasis on reliability, but the people who build roadside IEDs might not.
Okay, so I'm going to try to repeat that as eloquently as it was stated. The people at Smith & Wesson would agree with the reliability aspect. The people who build improvised explosive devices in fields of combat just want to see a result.
And I think you hit the critical point. You're looking at perspective. So let's take Smith & Wesson as a U.S. perspective and IED as a non-U.S. perspective, whoever the foreign entity is. Some are meant for mass destruction. Some are meant for very precise, very, one shot, one kill. So if an IED goes out as Stuxnet and a M80 goes out as, one shot, one kill across, 1,000 yards by a Marine, there's a different perspective because we all have a different perspective. Sun Tzu and the Art of War versus the U.S. Constitution are very different.
He just cited Sun Tzu. He has to drink.
That's the throwdown quote. Yes. Once you throw that down, it's all over.
Well, but as we listen to this, it's very interesting to hear the different perspectives and where people are coming from. But I'm hearing an aspect of reliability. I'm hearing an aspect of quality. I'm hearing an aspect of intent or alignment with mission and purpose. So let me ask you a different question. Is there such a thing as a weaponized exploit outside of a military context?
Absolutely.
Could you
Phone a
elaborate?
friend, Charlie?
Could you elaborate?
Can I elaborate? Yeah, so some like entity wants to buy your exploit, right? They want it to work. They don't want a write-up of a vulnerability. They don't want a proof of concept that makes EIP $$. They want something where when they launch it, it works, right? So, I think
Elaborate on which kind of entities theoretically these might be.
these would be entities with lots of money that want to pay for like 30 lines of code, tons of money. Right?
Like organized crime, nation state?
No, I'm talking about like government and their various.
So that would be yes.
Okay.
Well, depending on
I
who
was
you
gonna say,
voted for.
I would definitely say organized crime, nation state. I think there's different levels of people that are going to pay different levels of money for different accesses and/or outcomes.
I knew we'd get into pricing.
Oh, we'll get to pricing. We will.
So who raise your hand here if you've sold an exploit ever for money?
Do we have to?
Yes, I am authoritative.
Does our normal salary count?
No, there's another hand.
Does our
Shoot.
normal salary count?
No, that doesn't count. That's what you get paid to do.
But isn't that the whole point? You got
Wasn't
paid
that
to
the
do your
question?
job.
All right, I'm desperately trying to avoid going to the next stage of this conversation, but before I do go to follow this down the rabbit hole, does anyone else have framing or definitional questions? It seems like the scope is pretty heavily weighted towards organizations with lots of money and seemingly nation-state intent.
Yeah, the other one's what we were talking about earlier. If somebody, if a developer won't fix a bug until you give them a valid proof of concept,
that's
but
not
that
a weapon.
term has a slightly different connotation, which is why I don't think we really went there.
Again, calc is not a weapon.
I think even like a developer who wouldn't fix a bug if you showed EAP was $$, like is horrible, right? So
Yeah.
like it doesn't take a weaponized exploit to make a developer work. Go for
Agreed,
it.
but I don't know.
But
Some
again,
people
Twitter
might-
where
we're getting
I
into
work, we fix
definitional.
stuff
We're getting
by
into
telling
definitional as opposed to binary at this point. I mean, a weapon is going to be a weapon regardless of who's using it. And to your point, if you can sell it, it's probably a weapon whether it works or not.
So is there
I
anything
mean, you
in
can
this EDI?
sell a vulnerability, right? You just can't. You just get a hell of a lot less than if you sell something that you click a button and it works.
Yeah, yes.
Agreed.
So, I hate to do this, Dave.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
The weaponization, you keep saying it's not a weapon called help. I might disagree. A block is still a weapon even if you're shooting bullets.
So for those.
You can put a payload in it that does cause damage that's sort of reliable.
I totally agree with the.
Hey, one second.
Yeah, I do too.
audience.
I happen to agree.
So the
Wait.
question was a Glock, or the statement was calc is a weapon because you could put something else in. A Glock does not cease to be a weapon because you can put blanks into it. On the other hand, very few people talk about weaponizing their kitchen cutlery, even though it is a knife. It would cut someone. If it's a good knife, it would kill someone. People generally don't talk about weaponizing their cars. Okay, Charlie's an exception. But there are a lot of things which can be turned into weapons. But if we're talking about a weaponized exploit, we're talking about something that is done. It is reliable. It has an actual hostile payload. It will.
It's a loaded
No.
no,
Well-
no, it's not.
But I see the M as a weapon, regardless of what, if you put a murder on it or you put a nuclear bomb on it, it's still a weapon.
On the other
Right,
hand,
But
a
again,
rocket,
you're
a
going
rocket that
kinetic
launches-
versus cyber, and it's a very gray line between kinetic and cyber because you can take out an entire hospital and kill 500 people with a weaponized exploit. You can take out a Hiroshima with an atomic bomb.
And
The
again,
difference also goes into the press. I mean, how is that then explained going forward? Was that a weapon or was that a mistake?
Yeah,
And
or to put it bluntly, a mortar shell packed with explosives is a weapon unless it's a firework that's going to go off and set things off on the 4th of July.
intent has a lot to do with
Intent
this.
has a lot to do with it and how it's used. So it is very easy, I would agree, for someone to take something that is delivering a payload of calc and make it deliver something that's worse.
I
But
think
that
intent
doesn't make it a weapon.
Intent has nothing to do with it.
But if you take a firework and point it at somebody, is the firework then a weapon?
Yes, but I wouldn't say you've weaponized it. I'd say you're.
I would say
changing the
it's
use.
stupid to keep arguing about the definition, but I would just to clarify my point.
Can I
Weaponized-
make a comment real quick? This is Manny Garcia.
No, you may not.
He has a microphone. I think
has
we
a
have to.
I would just say that
Damn it, he's got a microphone too. Go
They've
ahead.
weaponized the
there's
audience.
microphones everywhere. So I guess I would say that the weapon, you're talking about the payload or the payload versus the actual transporter medium, right? So you can deliver the payload via calc, you could deliver the payload via some other mechanism, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the payload on what that actual weapon does, right? I mean, isn't that really what this conversation's about?
Well,
Is
the weapon might not be the payload.
So see, we totally should listen to Manny because he's right. The difference between an exploit would deliver calc, a weaponized exploit
A
would
weaponized
deliver
exploit can
an actual
deliver
hostile
calc.
payload.
No, weaponized exploit just has to do with reliability, stability, all that stuff. Yeah. It's like
Right.
if it
I'm
works
pretty
not-
sure
and
people-
It's pluggable. You plug in the Stuxnet module versus the calc module.
But again,
Weaponized.
The Stuxnet version is weaponized. The calc module is, why is
No.
calc on my
No,
screen?
but the weapon
not at
also
all.
has to be non-attributable. It also
Oh, a
has
new
to,
requirement.
No, nothing about attribution.
Look, we could easily talk around in circles on the definitions. Let's pivot to the next section here. From what I
Come on,
understand,
moderator, let's get this thing moving.
different intelligent people have differing opinions on the definitions. You've heard
And us.
You've heard some of those definitions.
And the rest of us.
My takeaway is it seems to be largely nation-state focused. It seems to be largely focused on the quality, the relative quality, and it seems to be focused on
All right,
intent
Charlie.
matters. So let's use the intent to pivot to the next piece, which is most technologies are dual use, right? A hammer can build a home. A hammer can crack a skull. It depends on how it's being used and by whom. So given that these can be dual use, there's researchers speculating that the offensive malware known as Stuxnet was reversed, strip mined, and repurposed by potentially other nation states. So given that they can pick this grenade back up and rethrow it, let's spend a little bit of time talking about the slippery slope of dual use weapons.
I think you've sort of nailed it. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. If you go back to actual brand weapons, and you go back to the ancient world, you go back to antiquity, you have a spear. And the problem with a spear is you take your spear and you throw it at the other guys. And whether or not you actually hit someone on the other side, someone else on the other side can pick up that spear and throw it right back in your face. And one of the interesting innovations that the Romans did with the pilum was they put the sharp point of the spear attached on a really bendy, sort of soft bit of iron, so that
bendy
when
is
you
the
threw
technical
it,
term.
bendy is a wonderful technical term, man. Don't diss bendy. You threw it, and whether or not it hit someone, it bent. And it would take you a while to straighten it back out. The end result was you had a weapon that you could use, but could not be used against you immediately. The problem with any kind of offensive use of exploit technology is you pretty much have a weapon that can be pivoted and turned around very, very quickly.
Yeah, let's go on the assumption that the United States uses weapons of mass destruction with cyber. The U.S.
He said
has...
Sun Tzu, and then he said cyber.
Yeah,
By the way, bingo.
That means,
I
that
will
means he
drink to that.
cannot be considered as a legitimate source in any field.
If, in fact, a weapon goes out, a bullet can't be caught and reshot. A proper weaponized exploit cannot be refired. A improperly deployed, untested piece of software that's called a weapon might just be an improperly branded exploit itself.
So,
Swords aren't weapons.
Again, it could be hanging on your wall and it's called art.
Sort of splitting hairs. I mean, you can reverse how a bullet was shot and build your own gun. They could reverse how the exploit went and build their own. So it's kind of seems like you're splitting.
I think weaponized exploits can certainly be reversed and figured out how they work and figure out the vulnerability, figure out how they did and they exploited it and can be turned against you for sure.
they can try and make it harder to reverse it. They can try and...
You can patch your own
minimize it.
system secretly and then launch it, and then you're immune. But I think that, no one would do that.
Sounds like DEF CON CTF.
It's like the opposite of DEF CON CTF. Government CTF.
So DEF CON CTF.
Not this year, man. Not this year. Weren't you paying attention?
No, they said the U.S. government wasn't allowed. They didn't say anything about foreign entities.
We have a question with the microphone.
Oh, man, we gotta listen.
It may be a
Hello?
comment.
This is so two-part question.
One.
I'll take
First-
both parts, and no one else can answer.
First part, and you can't answer one without the other. So first part is, with all the talk about weaponized exploits, how many weaponized exploits are out there?
7.
I stole one. Used to be 8.
Second, what's your hypothesis about the natural history of a weaponized exploit? In other words, once it's deployed, does it stay intact? Is it a weaponized exploit out there like a virus and it mutates? What does it look like for, over 5 years?
So I would say in a lot of cases, for example, MSO 8067, it is always used on a pen test when found. It's not a weapon unless the intent is to get into the network that you're going after. The lowest hanging fruit is typically what is gone after. If something is written to attack MSO 8067 based on a DNS callback, that could be considered a weapon, and therefore there's however many Microsoft patches there have been in the last 10 years.
So also to answer sort of an implicit part of a thing, viruses mutate because viruses reproduce on their own. Software does not yet reproduce on its own. It changes because someone has deliberately changed it.
But it is active. In other words, code, do you believe code is utterly and absolutely stable, or does code, change over time?
Code is stable until it's implemented.
I was going to say
it's taking on.
I was going to say
I don't believe code is stable.
I was going to say code is absolutely as stable as programmers.
Which is also as stable as the platform that code is going on. I mean, you could put the most secure code out there on an unstable OS, and the system itself is unstable. So you're cutting hair.
Data's not, bits and bytes aren't stable over time.
He has no
Let me
hair.
give you some facts. So I sold an exploit to the U.S. government or a contractor thereof, and 9 months later, it was reported to ZDI. So for 9 months, who knows what happened, right? Maybe like the day I sold it to them, they were like popping boxes. Maybe they just sat on it. Who knows? But definitely for 9 months, no one talked about it. So, and that's just one data point. I don't know, like what else happens?
Every year at DEF CON since 10, we've been sniffing the wireless almost completely. Every year we come back with 6 or 7 O days. Some of them get patched, some of them don't. So even in just, DEF CON, we were talking earlier, DEF CON is the one place that people will burn an O day just to be cool.
Just for kicks. And to answer real quick his question about how many, I think a lot of people would be tempted to say like millions and millions because there's a lot of malware and stuff out there, but I actually think a lot of it's just repurposed, so it's probably not as much as people think. And in terms of intact,
The other thing to remember is that we like to talk about O-Day because O-Day is inherently cool, and O-Day means it's unpatched, and O-Day means it's new. But the fact is, as long as there are people out there running boxes that never get updated and running old versions of known vulnerable things, O-Day doesn't, it doesn't matter that you've really barricaded the hell out of your door when you've got all your windows and your garage open.
All right, comment?
You've got an interesting issue with time here, that arrows took 50,000 years to mitigate and they're no longer effective. 0867 took weeks or months to mitigate because the flaw is kind of obvious and okay, we patch it. So most cyber attacks have short shelf life because you can patch them so they're no longer effective. DDoS is an interesting exception.
Yeah, but depending on how the DDoS is mitigated, it's
summarize
still.
that for video.
Right, sorry.
You want to take a stab?
Nope.
Okay. We're talking about time horizon. It took longer to respond to arrows than it does maybe to patch an exploitable vulnerability.
In fairness, we haven't mitigated arrows.
I was about to say, if I shoot you with an arrow right now, you're vulnerable.
more sound effects.
I can show up with an armored car that's not a problem.
Right now, you're vulnerable to an arrow.
Right now, everyone in this room is vulnerable to a skilled archer with a high-power bow. Unless someone is wearing chainmail and didn't tell us, in which case, please stand up and take a very clanky bow.
The black and white ball is Saturday.
All right. The spirit of the question was, does get to the velocity or the rate of change with some of these things. Plus, we're also in the development world, which we really, much to my surprise, we haven't really talked much about the development side of this equation. But in the development world, as you move from waterfall to agile to DevOps, the rate of change is breathtaking. So you never really have a stable code base, which some actually argue is a security benefit. But how does rate of change matter here? Is that why people sell it while they can, sell it quick, sell it for the most money, and hope they beat the bug bounties? Or
I mean, the rate of change and increase of technology and knowledge throughout the world is amazing to see what's happening right now. So,
But I'll still go back to the fact that 08067 still works. And we're in 13, that's 5 years old.
You can go take a look. There have been, since this is Black Hat and DEF CON, I'm running with an old feature phone, so I can't go take a look. But go take a look. There have been a number of reports that people have done over the last year and before that, talking about patch rates and what versions of old versions of this operating system or of Java or of whatever people happen to be running. And if you look at it, so many people are running stuff for which there are Metasploit modules out there that really O'Day is overkill for a lot of things.
All right, so you got there too fast. I was going to ask, is Metasploit a weapon?
Metasploit is a weapon like a Glock is a weapon. You give a Glock to somebody that's never shot a gun before, and they're going to miss their target every time. Give Metasploit to somebody that's never used it before, and every IDS in the world's going to pick it up.
I'd say it's not a weapon in this. It's a weapon like a slingshot is a weapon. So like you might be able to like shoot someone right in the face, but like any dumbass isn't going to be able. Like I can't be attacked by Metasploit, my personal computer, but like the U.S. government can own me 5 different ways.
But Metasploit's completely customizable, so in theory they could.
Most
as a framework, but like if you just download it and start pressing buttons, you're never going to get in my
But
system.
again, we're going from the highly skilled user. Highly skilled user versus the kid.
Highly skilled user who still just uses Metasploit can't get in. Like unless they're like writing their own exploits and their own modules and plugging it in, like that doesn't work. Like, but if you just download it and run it, like
Charlie,
most systems should be vulnerable.
Are you suggesting that your basic OPSEC is universally present in the
My OPSEC
enterprise?
is horrible, yet it still can live against any Metasploit module.
So Pwn to own is one with Metasploit?
Absolutely not.
No,
thanks.
Right.
Thanks, I appreciate that. So my exploits are written outside of Metasploit, like they're like 10 lines of Python.
Right. So 2 years ago, right after Black Hat and DEF CON, went to MetroCon and I discussed this notion of H.D. Moore's law. It says the strength of a casual script kiddie grows at the rate of Metasploit. And since then, I've asked every CISO to see if their PCI compliant network can handle Metasploit, and not one of them could to date in 2 years. So while you may be immune to Metasploit, this begs the question of what's the shared responsibility for, since we have really, really old unpatched software and vulnerabilities, it seems to me like this is almost a public health issue.
You got a question.
We have a question.
We have a question over here, and Jesse's going to burst.
He's going to burst.
He just popped. See the top?
How common is it for there to be bugs that a vendor would probably consider to be critical, EIP looks sketchy, that you cannot weaponize reliably?
There's a really big difference between I can affect or control EIP and I can get a reliable exploit. There are a lot more cases where, oh yeah, there's EIP, you should fix that because who knows if 6 months from now someone's going to come out with a paper that makes exploitation easy, and right now with the current state of the art, I have a reliable exploit. It's a lot harder to get a good exploit from EIP.
There's also a really good reason that everybody that presents at Black Hat and DEF CON that knows what they're doing has a video of their demo prior to giving their demo. Because computers are finicky things and they don't always react the way you expect them to. And when they don't react when you're in front of 5, 10, 15,000 people, you want to make sure you have something reliable. So unless it's weaponized, most people have videos before they do demos.
Yeah, I would say 5 years ago, getting an EIP, you were done. But now getting an EIP is like maybe half the equation. So at that point, then you have to get code executed. So maybe that means you have to know where the code is. So you need a information disclosure bug, or maybe you know there's some code signing, or who knows. But so getting EIP is not sort of the way to define whether something. I mean, certainly you need to fix that, but that's not an exploit, right? So now there's a second step, like okay, maybe that if you have a very special bug, you can change. You can take the fact you can corrupt memory to also read memory and write memory, and then you're done.
Yeah. But, I mean, the other thing to remember, and this is why, obviously, again, to agree with Charlie, vendors, you need to fix those if EIP is even influenced by an attacker, or strongly influenced. But the problem is that we can say right now, don't think it's exploitable, but there have been too many cases of people coming up with new techniques and suddenly old bugs come live, or someone comes up with a different vulnerability that just requires a crash, and well, here's this handy crash sitting right there. So from a sort of a defense perspective, yeah, those need to get fixed. From an offense perspective, it's always what's the state of the art.
So I think this is kind of an interesting, that's kind of the techie geek jargon talking about it, and then there's the whole there's the whole political part of weaponization. I'm just saying there's a separation between the two.
So what in my attire makes you think I'm a politician?
No, exactly. That's what I'm saying. We went down that more technical route, and the greater populace of whether Metasploit's legal because it's a weapon or not, totally different. It's just a different realm of people that are going to discuss that. I just think it's interesting.
See, I think the other thing is, real quick, a weapon in cyber world needs a target, and the target has to match the weapon. In the kinetic world, a Glock can shoot at that wall or that wall or that wall. That could be Linux, Mac, and Windows. It matters what you're shooting at as much as it matters what you're shooting. And that's a big distinction between the question that was asked earlier about kinetic versus cyber. I can't throw, you're shaking your head, I can't throw an OS X exploit at a Windows box and have it be effective. But I can shoot you with a Glock.
Charlie probably could figure it out.
Yeah.
Certainly could, but okay.
On the other hand, you probably could throw a Java exploit at all three of them and have it work.
Agreed, but that's working at an application, not at an OS. And there's a big difference with that too.
It works.
But one of our panelists here was lovingly trying to nudge us to the political and ethical aspect of this. So let's go there. So, there's a schism and almost a civil war right now. A lot of people loved EFF because EFF would defend researchers, and now some of the EFF types are really upset with people like Charlie. They think it's really, really unethical to sell exploits.
That's funny because I'm upset at EFF. So
EFF hates you too.
Well, why don't you frame that schism for the audience if they haven't understood this before? What's the divide?
So there's two things, right? So I want to be able to find bugs, write code, do whatever I want, write whatever programs I want on my computer, and not have anyone hassle me, right? And then there's the other group, which normally EFF likes that, but in this one case, EFF doesn't. And their attitude is my exploits weaken dissidents somewhere else in the world. So I would say maybe I don't think so, but that's cool. You think that. But the thing is, you still shouldn't limit what I can research, what I can write, what code I can write, what code I can publish, what code I can sell. For me, that's the big difference.
But I think the big difference between a weaponization and Charlie doing research. So you can research all you want. You can come up with as many lines of code as you want. As soon as you take that code and do something with it external to yourself, you've then made that a public issue as opposed to a personal issue.
You can write anything you want as long as you never publish it.
Exactly.
That's free speech, right?
No,
wait.
No, publishing.
Nope.
Oh, wait.
Nope.
Oh my God, I agree with Dave. Yes.
No, don't do this.
So
the world
Run now. Half the panel agrees.
Kittens just exploded.
Well, no, but in fairness, now there is, I think, a real question, and it's way, way beyond the time we have, unless we, take Manny's advice and just seize the rest of the night, and let people, forcibly dethrone us from up here. On the ethical issues relating to the sale of exploits and what you sell and who you sell it to. That being said, it's worth noting that the lawyer's definition of ethics is the zealous defense of the interests of their client, which makes me wonder if they get to operationally redefine ethics to mean it's really a good thing for them to do everything in their power to get a murderer off. Why are they in a position to lecture anyone else on ethics? And I understand there are real issues about an adversarial system, and we can go into that as well, but it's very simplistic for lawyers who have their own special definition of ethics to try and create special definitions of ethics for everybody else.
So what if we start talking about weapons as defensive mechanisms, and then the entire paradigm shifts?
Yeah,
and I use paradigm, I'm drinking again.
It's not offensive or defensive, it's free speech.
Well,
I can write whatever code I want, and you can't stop
Let me say something about that.
It's
Okay,
not
so
illegal
some
to
people
write
want to
code.
go very technical, just let me write my lines of Python and use my debugger and everything. And I totally get what you're saying. But when
And you
broaden,
agree, right?
Well, sort of, except
Great,
for all
then
these
stop
issues
talking.
are more complex than you're making it sound, in the sense that there's a social responsibility if you then give somebody else the ability to steal credit card numbers and
but-
you know.
let me
No,
see
but
there.
then that's against the law. They shouldn't do that. But
Exactly.
me publishing how to do that is not against the law.
hold on a
So we're
second.
now
I'm gonna-
rewriting
I'm-
law
I'm actually
because
going
cyber
to-
doesn't make sense
Well,
to the
but-
existing law.
But when
One
we're
at a
talking
time.
about ethics, or if we're talking about what we should be doing, I'm going to steal from Jason over there in the back, paying attention to his phone. Let's assume that we have two options. We can use a really, really overt kinetic attack and start a major war.
Boom.
Or we can use a plausibly deniable electronic attack to get the same benefit. I'm hard-pressed to say that, oh, it's unethical to sell an exploit that does the latter, because it's far more ethical for us to get, thousands or hundreds of thousands of people killed.
Stuxnet.
All right, so comment in the second row. I will repeat it.
I think that as soon as we define selling exploits as just weapons production and apply those ethics to that, for example, on what you said, Charles, earlier, that you sold this exploit and you don't care whether they sit on it or you're like blind to that. I think that's wrong. Your weapons. You produced a weapon, and it's okay. There are many weapons manufacturers. As at the moment that you see it like that, you say, okay, I produced a weapon. I understand that, and now this weapon is at the hands of some party that I trust their judgment, or I don't trust their judgment. Just don't go blind on that. But it's not just it's not a free speech issue. It's more of an.
It's probably.
I hear what
an
you're saying.
and.
But I think it's both. So it's a free speech issue in that no one should limit that I can sell that or not sell that or whatever. But I do agree that who you sell to matters, right? So I sold it to the U.S. government, and I don't know if I trust them, but I don't think you can really say that there's something wrong with trusting them, right?
But free speech doesn't cover the Beretta for making a new weapon.
And in fairness, I believe, and I could be wrong, so I hopefully that someone will correct me, and then we'll just edit this out of the recording, that the EFF position is that you're free to publish it publicly, they just don't want you selling it privately.
But you can't sell it publicly until there's a mitigation against it if there's human life involved.
It's all bullshit. You can write code, you can sell code. That's it.
I didn't say I agreed with it.
I didn't say I agreed with it.
I'm just saying like it's all bullshit. Like that one thing is just so wrong.
But in fairness, again, putting from another direction, I've known a number of very, very skilled knifesmiths over the years, and they make really nice knives, and they make very sharp knives. And do they have responsibility if someone who bought one of those knives goes on a rampage and starts stabbing a lot of people?
Knives don't kill people, people kill
All right, so wait, please don't say that, because now where we're going to go is like gun control for exploits. Now,
Deviant, are you in the audience?
Let's pull this back a tiny bit.
So are you saying that we cannot sell exploit kits with more than 10 exploits in them?
Yeah, a magazine. Oh, that's good.
Your clip can only hold 9.
Clip size.
But seriously, there is an intermediate.
Plus one in the buffer, plus one in the buffer.
It's chambered.
That's awesome. All right.
And with a knob sled, you get 2.
If you step back away from, say, offensive, and you look at like crypto, we do have export controls, right? We do have certain
Do we have
countries
any more,
who
though?
shouldn't sell.
Do we have
He was asking
export
for regulation,
controls
that's what he's talking-
besides to like North Korea or something? Like my understanding was there's no export controls to like most countries.
Oh,
right?
there's lots of export controls.
There's lots of export controls. Yeah. All right. Agreed. But when you get to that, so Charlie, you've sold.
Yes, I'm the bad guy. I have sold code.
So a follow-up question
You need
is,
to go tea.
I know. I have
what
taken
is the
my work
responsibility?
and actually made money from it. I know I'm terrible for that.
I'm not judging you. I'm asking
Why
you a
he lost
question.
his hair.
So the question I have for you is, if you're willing to sell, what kind of personally self-imposed ethics would you put on when you should or shouldn't sell, and how bad the exploit is, and how do you decide?
How do I personally decide?
How should a researcher at DEF CON?
What are
Black Hat
Charlie
think
Miller's
about
ethics?
What would Charlie Miller do?
Yeah, this is
WWCMD.
awesome. I can't believe you asked me this. No, seriously.
Be a mentor here. Help us understand.
Yeah. So I'm all about free speech and do what you want, write code, research stuff, buy stuff and research it. So I really think you should be able to do whatever you want with it.
And
like I personally sold it to the U.S. government because I felt that that was an ethically okay thing to do. Because
Would you have given it to the U.S. government as much as you would
I
sell
don't
it?
give it to anybody.
So
I don't give it to you, the U.S. government, nobody. Like I want to get paid for my work. If China would have came to me, like that's a question I would rather not answer on film. But
what Charlie's not telling you is he actually has a magic 8-ball in his office.
All right.
I shake it. It's like, should I sell this to Israel? Sorry, Israel, I can't do it.
How did you know you actually sold it to the U.S. government?
So that a normal person would have a hard time answering that question. But having worked for the U.S. government, I knew people in the U.S. government, and so I'm pretty sure I actually sold it to the U.S. government. But
We have 5 minutes, so we should try to pivot to wrapping
so
up.
now you're gonna shock me and say, "Really? We found some guy who says you sold it to North Korea or something." But no.
It's in the chopper.
Well, I mean, it does come down to there's a spectrum of ethics in our community. So some people are a little less conscientious than others, and
It definitely is worth noting for people who are considering that false flag operations where one country will pretend to be another are far from uncommon in this world. So
weekly.
All I know is when I sold that exploit, there were a lot of people who wanted to have my CISSP revoked because I was no longer ethical.
I'm trying. Okay, I'll admit I have a bias against CISP, but I'm trying to see how that becomes a threat.
All right, let's go down the line, and we'll start with.
Man, that may need to get edited out too.
We'll
I
start
don't know
with
yet.
Rick, and
You might not even be part of this panel.
I might
bet.
suddenly vanish.
what would you like to impart this fine audience with to capstone and synthesize that wandering path through this topic?
Thank you for letting me go first. I really do believe that, ethics are a big deal in this case, but again, Smith & Wesson makes things that kill things. We are only as strong as the weakest link, and if we're sending out exploits off of systems that are not defensible, we're probably going into a war that we're going to lose. And that being said, we should probably be very careful with what we're attacking with so that it doesn't come back to us, which means sanitation of the code, sanitization of the code, making sure that it is non-attributable. Wow, these are hard words. And that the code actually works every time, and it's a one-shot, one-kill. If we start sending things out like a shotgun, and somebody creates a capability to catch those shotgun blasts and throw them back, we're going to eat our own dog food. And I know Microsoft's done this for years, but we're going to be in big trouble. And I think that's the biggest thing we got to walk out of this with. We're going to reap what we sow, and we need to make sure that we're okay with that.
Jared?
So this topic of weaponization is a very interesting, I guess, exciting, kind of evolving topic. It's one that I've definitely seen a lot of change in. For example, I can personally attest to having attempted to sell a vulnerability that I had essentially, I don't know if I want to use the word weaponized, but proved that it was a problem to a company, and in that
Join
year,
me, Jared. Just admit it.
Many years
Come to the
ago,
dark side.
that was
Your hands are
there
dirty,
were a lot
stop.
of companies that were considering that, like, call out the dogs and the lawyers because this guy's trying to extort us and all this kind of bullcrap, right? And I've seen a lot of change in the industry since then. Now even Microsoft has a bug bounty program, right? They've changed the terms and stuff like that. Instead of whatever exploit buying or something, they're calling it bug bounty and stuff like that. But I've seen a lot of change in the market and a lot of willingness from vendors to accept some responsibility to say, hey, we've got problems and we want to reward researchers, because I agree with Charlie. I think people doing the hard work for this should get paid, and there should be some constructive, positive outlet for them to get paid. And the whole, white market selling, gray market selling, black market selling, there's a lot of funky stuff that goes on in that. I personally know a fair bit about some of that, and it's just a weird area to get involved in because you're trying to figure out, like, how do I sell this? And what, if I give it to them before they pay me, will they pay me? and there's all this crazy stuff that goes on because it's totally it's like the Wild West, right? And so,
brokers.
in some ways, if you're trying to make the world a better place in terms of security, I think it would be better if vendors would actually kind of pick up some of the slack, as we see them doing, as opposed to all these other markets. But there's a place and a time for each and every action, whether weaponizing and using it, and so I see a place and a time for each thing.
All right, one minute each.
So as the I suppose as the token white hat vulnerability buyer on the panel, we do buy vulns. By the way, you don't need the exploit except for Pwn to own. But the white hat market is never going to match what a government's going to pay. It's just a fact of life. The bug bounty programs are not going to match what a government's going to pay.
Why not? Have you heard
I don't know if you've seen the relative size of the budgets.
Sequestration and continuing resolution?
But the relative size of the budgets, the white market vuln and the bug bounty programs in the world are a rounding error on the US budget. The consideration that I would make, though, if we start talking about actually weaponizing exploits, and from an American perspective, the overwhelming majority of the American public live in highly urbanized areas. These areas are not capable of supporting their population without trucking in food, without trucking in fuel, without power for heating and cooling, and without power to pump water. We're in the position of basically standing around holding guns while soaked in gasoline. This is a really bad place to start shooting. The fact is, as an industrialized power with a highly urban population, if people start shooting around real weaponized exploits aimed at infrastructure, a lot of people are going to die, and a lot of people who are going to die are going to be in the industrialized West.
We're 3 days from riots.
Charlie?
It's really that
So,
be profound.
There's vulnerabilities, there's exploits, there's proof of concepts, there's weaponized exploits. And I think the thing that makes weaponized exploits unique is that the only people who need them are people who tend to use them, right? So if you want to report a vuln to Microsoft or whoever, they don't need a weaponized exploit. They just need a description of the vulnerability, right? They can patch it from that. And if you want to really impress them, you can show a crash or something, right? The only people who need an exploit that works every time are people who want to use that exploit. And so that's what makes sort of the ethical and all that other stuff sort of come up into play, because it's like, if I want to give, some dude I don't know, like a information, a crash report versus a weaponized exploit, there's a lot of difference on what that person can do, right? So in the former case, they need to actually know how to write an exploit, which not that many people know how to do. In the second case, they need to be able to hit the return button, which everyone knows how to do. So I think it's important to allow people to do what they want to do and research what they want to do. But, that's really sort of the whole ethical issue is weaponized exploits takes the smarts out of what we do and gives it to anyone, where just vulnerability information, we can all use that. And so there is a fundamental difference, but, it's tough.
Okay, I have all sorts of ways I could summarize this, but we're a few minutes over time, so I will clip that and talk in the hallway instead. As we depart, panelists, if people want to hear your ramblings more this week, anybody have any presentations where they might want people to come see them?
0x Charlie on Twitter.
Are you presenting on car hacking this week?
I am presenting on car hacking Friday morning, 10 a.m. at DEF CON. I was rejected from Black Hat.
Informed sources tell me that I'll be at the Galleria bar for much of the next couple of days, and then I'll be at various bars at the Rio.
I'll be there as well.
I'll be at GerCon, DakotaCon, DerbyCon, for example, coming up this year.
Rio bars, all of them, and we're running the Wireless Village at DEF CON, so please stop by. We've got 12 times the space we had last year, and we're running a full-on CTF, so it should be pretty bad.
Cool.
Ass.
Nick Rococo and I are the Sunday morning keynote at DEF CON, 10 a.m. track 1. It's called The Cavalry Isn't Coming, and we intend to start a revolution. So, thank you for your time. I'm not sure we know more about weaponized exploits, but we talked about it.
Big round of applause.
Thanks, everyone.
Big round of applause.
And hopefully we didn't say anything that will cause any of us to be looking for work tomorrow.